Good morning, everybody. Before I start my talk, I have to say the very important quote of Ahmad Davutoglu, who was former Prime Minister of Turkey. He said that peace and freedom comes along. Without freedom, there is no peace. Without peace, there is no freedom. For the last 76 years, Palestinian people have been suffering this destruction, disposition, displacement, cruelty, enmity from the state of Israel. The last records, when we look at the newspaper, when they attacked Gaza and in East Jerusalem and West Bank too, they have blocked the deliveries of food, water, fuel and electricity. And even they told the people to withdraw, to move from the northern part of Gaza to the southern part. And so far, they have killed about 8,000 Palestinians, both from Gaza and West Bank and even from Masjid al-Aqsa, East Jerusalem. We know that Gaza is 2.5 million people living there. World population, they unanimously say that Gaza is open air prison. And still, Israel, they don't stop the attack on Gazan people. When we look at the history of Israel, we can understand the only state who refused to obey the international laws. And they very often break the agreements and rapprochement between Palestine and Israel. There are a huge list of international law violations from Israel. Israel has violated about 27 resolutions from the United Nations Security Council. Like a few examples, a resolution like 25, 54, 111, 233, 234, 236, and etc. A lot of violations from international law. Israel has been doing that. And at the same Israel, they blame the Palestinian people that the Palestinian people are not keeping with the agreements with Israel. The issue did not start from the Hamas attack, actually. The issue started from the very establishment of Palestine. When you look at the history of Palestine, we can find two terminologies. One is Nakba, another one is Naksa. The Nakba, which means catastrophe, refers to the mass displacement and dispossession of Palestinians during 1984 in the Arab-Israel War. Before Nakba, Palestine was multi-ethnic and multicultural society. Foundation of events of Nakba took place shortly after the 1948 Palestinian War, including 78% of mandatory Palestine being declared as Israel, the expulsion and flights of 7 lakhs Palestinians, and related depopulation and destruction of 500 Palestinian villages by Zionist militias. According to the data of PalestinianRemembered.com, Israel controlled 774 towns and villages during the Nakba in 1948. And they destroyed 531 Palestinian towns and villages. Israeli force atrocities also include more than 70 massacres and genocides against Palestinians, killing 15,000 Palestinians during this Nakba. Before this 1947 and 1949, at least 7,50,000 Palestinians from 1.9 million population were made refugees before, before the establishment of Palestine. The Zionist forces has taken more than 78% of historic Palestine, ethnically cleansed and destroyed 530 villages and towns. The history started from 1882. The thousands of Eastern European and Russian Jews began settling in Palestine. This is known as Aliyah. Aliyah means the Jewish migration to the Palestine. All these Jewish migration started because of the Zionist propaganda. The Zionist propaganda was started by Theodor Herzl, who was the founder of political Zionism in 1896. When he wrote a book, The Jewish State, he said that in that book, the remedy to the centuries of old anti-Semitic sentiments and attacks in Europe was the creation of Jewish state. At first, when they organized an international conference for Zionism, they declared that the first place for the homeland for Jewish was not Palestine. Some scholars, they consider Argentina or Madagascar or some European place, or some African place too, some Latin American or African or some European place. They consider this place even before considering Palestine. But these Zionist leaders, especially Theodor Herzl, he insisted that we should be making a national home for Palestine in Palestine for Jewish land. For that, he twice met Sultan Abdulhamid II, the Caliph of Ottoman Caliphate. But Sultan Abdulhamid II, he totally refused that. He said, the Palestine is the Waqf property for Muslims. We don't give that money, that land to anybody. But at the same time, we must understand, at the same time, the Jews were staying there, and Christians and Muslims, most predominantly Muslim, there. At the same time, Jews also are staying there. And after that, some scholars say even the collapse of Ottoman Empire, there is a reason for emergence of Zionism. Zionist people also had some hand for the collapse of Ottoman Empire. After this dissolution of Ottoman Empire, the British occupied Palestine as a part of secret Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916 between France and Britain to divide up the Middle East for imperial interests. In 1917, as Dr. Abdurrahman has said here, in 1917, the British mandate started. Before British mandate started, the Lord Balfour, he declared that the British government will give a national home for Jewish people in Palestine. That was the direct recorded document for all the Jewish process later on. Then this pledge, actually the pledge of Lord Balfour was to the Chaim Weizmann, the British Russian Zionist leader and the scholar whose contribution to the British war effort during the World War I made him well connected to the upper echelons of British government. Weizmann lobbied hard for more than 2 years British former Prime Minister David Lloyd George and former Foreign Minister Arthur Balfour to publicly commit Britain to building a homeland for the Jews in Palestine. By giving their support to Zionist goals in Palestine, the British hoped they could shore up support among the significant Jewish population in US and Russia for the Allied effort during World War I. They also believed that Balfour Declaration would secure their control over Palestinians after the war. From 1919 onwards, Zionist migration to Palestine, facilitated by the British, increased dramatically. Weizmann, who later became Israel's first president, was realizing his dream of making Palestine as Jewish as England is English. Between 1922 and 1935, the Jewish population rose from 9% to nearly 27% of the total population of Palestine. displacing tens of thousands of Palestinian tenants from their lands as Zionist broadland from absentee landlords, and evacuating the real owner from the lands. Leading Arab Palestinian intellectuals openly warned against the motives of Zionist movements in the press as early as 1908, with the Nazi seizure of power in Germany between 1933 to 1936. 30,000 to 60,000 European Jews arrived in the shore of Palestine. In 1936, the Palestinian people, they also started the resistance against Zionist atrocity and British imperialism, especially led by Sheikh Izzuddin al-Qassam, whose name you may be familiar with because Hamas has their army wing. They are known as Brigade of Izzuddin al-Qassam. He started his revolution. He resisted against Israeli militant groups and British imperialism. And at the same time, the Arab revolt also happened in the another Arabian regions. But in 1939, this Israeli militia and Zionist movement, and with the help of British imperialism, they destroyed 2,000 Palestinian homes in 1939. Put 9,000 Palestinian concentration camps and subject to them violent interrogations, including torture, and deported 200 Palestinian nationalist leaders too. At least 10% of Palestinian male population had been killed, or wounded, or exiled, or imprisoned by the end of this Arab revolt. The British government worried, the British government who has been the helper for the Zionist movement, they also become worried. And they worried about the eruption of violence between the Palestinians and Zionists. Tried to curtail, control, prevent at several points immigration of European Jews. Zionist lobbies London overturned their efforts. In 1944, we must remember that date. In 1944, several Zionist armed groups, they declared war on Britain. In 1944, they declared war on Britain for trying to put limits on Jewish immigration to Palestine at a time when Jews were fleeing from the Holocaust. The Zionist paramilitary organizations launched a number of attacks against the British, and they have attacked the King David Hotel bombing in 1946, where British administrative headquarters were housed. And they have killed 91 people, 91 diplomats, administrators, especially British officials at that hotel. In 1947, the British government announced it would be handing over the disaster it had created in Palestine to the UNO and ending its colonial project there. They want to save themselves from this colonialism, these atrocities. On November 29, 1947, the UN adopted Resolution 181, recommending the partition of Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. At that time, the Jews in Palestine constituted only 1/3 of population and owned less than 6% of the total land area. Under the UN partition plan, they were allocated, these people, they have less land there, but under the UN partition plan, they were allocated 55% of land, and encompassing many of main cities with the Palestinian Arab majorities, and importantly coastline from Haifa to Jaffa. The Arab state would be deprived of key agricultural lands and seaports, which led the Palestinians to reject the proposal later. Shortly following UN resolution in 181, then the war broke out between Palestinian Arabs and Zionist armed groups, who, unlike the Palestinians, have gained extensive military training and arms from the British in World War II. Zionist paramilitary groups launched a vicious process of ethnic cleansing in the form of large-scale attacks aimed at the mass expulsion of Palestinians from their towns and villages to build Jewish states, which culminated in the Nakba, which I mentioned before. British occupation authorities has announced that they would be ending their mandate, British mandate, in Palestine on the eve of May 15, 1948. 8 hours earlier, David Ben-Gurion, who became the first Israel's prime minister, announced what Zionism called a declaration of independence in Tel Aviv. The British mandate ended at midnight, and May 15, the Israeli state came into being. The Israeli state was established. And just after that, in the half of 1949, at least 7,50,000 Palestinians in total were forcibly expelled after the establishment of Israel and were fled outside their homeland. Zionist forces have committed about 222 atrocities, massacres, genocides against Palestinians by 1949, including massacres, attacks on such as bombings of homes, looting, and destruction of property or the entire villages. Establishment of Israel, the state extended its systematic ethnic cleansing through armistice agreements, through the agreements between Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon in 1949, but they did not consider these agreements as these Arab people. They didn't care about that agreement. They started to occupy these Arab states places too. The newly founded Israeli army committed a number of additional massacres after 1949. Number of additional massacres and campaigns forced displacement after this time. For example, in 1950, remaining 2,500 Palestinian residents of city Majid were forced into the Gaza Strip. About 2,000 inhabitants of Bir Sada were expelled to the West Bank, and some 2,000 residents of 2 northern villages were driven into the Syria. So this is the one example of Israeli atrocities against Palestinians. And by the midst of 1950s, the Palestinian population inside Israel had become about 1,95,000. And between 1948 and the mid of 1950s, some 30,000 or 15% of the population were expelled outside the borders of the new state, according to the Badal Refugee Rights Group. And after this, there have been a series of wars between Arab states and Israel, like 1949, 1949, 1956, 1967, 1973. All these wars, especially during the wars of in 1967, there is another name emerged as Nakba. Nakba means setback for Arabs. Israel occupied the remaining Palestinian territories of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and continues to occupy until today. That's how Hamas, they have issued a new Hamas charter in 2017. They said we are ready to agree before 1967 borders, but still Israel is not ready with that. Hamas is ready for the peace-making process, but Israel is not ready for that. And that issue started from 1967 war. And this Nakba led to the displacement of, this Nakba means the incidents that happened in 1967. This Nakba led to the displacement of some 4,30,000 Palestinians, half of which originated from the areas occupied in 1498 and were thus choice refugees. As in the Nakba, Israeli forces used military tactics that violated basic international rights law, such as attacks on civilian and expulsion. Most refugees fled into neighboring Jordan, with others going to Egypt and Syria, some other states too. So that is the real situation now. And after all these wars, in 1987, Palestinian people start the first intifada. First intifada, the scholars, especially Palestinian scholars, say why the first intifada started in 1987. because all Arab states, most of them, they have came into agreement with Israel. They are started to consider that the Israelis are another state. They forget their war, their disagreement with Israel. But and at the same time, Palestinians felt that all Arab states, Muslim Arab states, all of them, they forget the very existence of Palestinian people. That's how the Palestinian people started first intifada. There is a first intifada in 1987. At the very time, Hamas was established by the Ikhwani leaders of Palestine, Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, Abdulaziz Randisi, Yahya Ayyash, and some other scholars too. And they led the Palestinian resistance after. At the same time, there are some other agreements between Egypt and Israel that was known as Camp David agreements. Then Egypt also withdrew from the field, the confrontational field. Then in 1993, Yasser Arafat, with the leadership of Fatah and PLO, he also came into another agreement that is known as Oslo Accords in 1993 and 1995, second Oslo Accords. Because of that, the Yasser Arafat also left his arms, his resistance. And then there is only one power, the military power left there, that was Hamas. And with the help of another Islamic movement, Al-Harakatul Islami, Al-Jihadul Islami, Islamic Jihad, that is left in Gaza region. But at the same time, Palestinian people, sometimes they thought about themselves. They want some kind of democratic process in Palestine, the left presence. And they thought that there must be an electoral process. Then that happened in 2006. In that election, Hamas got the majority, especially 44% of the population. They recognized Hamas as their ruling party. But with the help of Israel and America, they interfered into the Palestinian issue, and the conflict happened between Fatah and Hamas. Then Hamas secured the Gaza region under their leadership. Then Fatah secured West Bank under their leadership. That was the issue. That's how Gaza is under the Hamas now. So after this election, Israel did not like the democracy. As Sir said, the Israel themselves argue that we are the only democratic country in the whole West Asian and North African region. But that is the issue. They did not like the democracy for others, for themselves too. They destroyed the relation of Hamas and Fatah at that time. Now they are in different entities. They are ruling West Bank and Gaza at the same time. And there is another intifada, second intifada, that happened in 2000 when the Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, with some militants, the military, they attacked, they forcefully came into the Masjid al-Aqsa region. The people revolted against that. That was the starting point of second intifada. Then now what is happening now? We are witnessing all these atrocities against the Palestinian resistance, Palestinian people. So we hope, as I said before, without freedom, there is no peace. And then without peace, there is no freedom. I can read my words. Thank you.